Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at some of the differences between the early 944 and the 924S. At first look, you can tell that the 924S is quite a bit narrower than the 944. Both of these cars are based on the original 924, which had a 2-liter engine, and later on Porsche developed the 924 Carrera GT, which had a wider body but a 2-liter turbocharged engine. Later on, they wanted more refinement, so they developed a 2.5-liter engine that went into the 944, but they carried over most of the interior components. So I thought that that's be a great reason to compare these two cars since they're so similar in that regard. Of course, the 924 Carrera GT had the wider fenders that were first seen on it, and that was carried over to the 944. And instead of a rear flare that was patched on, so to speak, they actually developed metal fenders for the 944. Both of these cars share the same front suspension and the same width in the back, and all they did was pretty much make a deeper dish wheel for these cars. So these are ET23 wheels, while the 924S, of course, retains the ET52 offset wheels, and we'll get into that more here in a moment. So basically, the only difference here is that the wheels push the car out about an inch on each side, making it wider. But going around here to the back here, you can see they look practically identical, although the spoiler on the 944 is quite a bit bigger, which was based on the one from the 924 Carrera GT. And the 924S received the smaller spoiler, which was from the 924 Turbo. As for the rear suspension, I mentioned it's a little bit different. The suspension pretty much remained the same from the 924 turbos with the 5-lug, while the 924S received the early offset aluminum trailing arms from the early offset 944 turbo. Moving into the interior here, you can see they retained pretty much the same interior from the original 924. And I'll take this for a second. I'll keep in mind that most 924Ss don't have the MPG gauge. So that's just one of the differences. 924Ss also don't have fog lights, so there's no switch here. It's just blanked out. They also do not have the brake pad warning light, and there's not even wiring for it. But other than that, the wiring for these two cars are practically identical. You can see even some 924S models came with cruise control. So coming around here to look in the early 944 interior, as I mentioned, all the wiring is practically the same. And so is the interior, with the only difference really being is that most 924Ss didn't have the MPG gauge, and none of them had the brake warning or the brake pad wear indicator. Early 944s also had a fader switch that the later cars didn't need, because you could just set the fade on the unit itself, despite having the sunroof switch in the same place and they're being identical. The 924S actually received the later sunroof mechanism. So next we'll take a look at the engines. As you can see, both cars have Porsche's 2.5-liter all aluminum inline 4-cylinder. There were some changes through the years that I'll try and go over. I often hear people ask if the 924S was really detuned, and that's only true in Europe, where their 944 made 156 horsepower, and their 924S in 1986 and 87 only made 147. Of course, here in the States, our 944 in 1987 only made 147 horsepower, so it was not detuned in the US. And in 1988, all models, as far as the 2.5 liter goes, had 158 horsepower. So the 924S and the 944 in all markets now had 158 horsepower, making them all equal as far as horsepower goes and no longer being detuned. So some of the differences between this early car and this 924S, of course, is that they swapped out the AAV valve, which is an auxiliary air valve, to help with the idle. It also has a supplementary air valve for the AC when it kicks on. That was all changed, and by 1985 they'd come out with the ISV, so everything that the 944 got in the engine bay, the 924S got. Of course, it still retains the old fuel line setup with the steel tank, but as far as the computer goes, that's all the same. The wiring's for the most part the same. It even got the oil level sender, and the only difference is that the wiring goes into the firewall this way rather than this way like it does on the later 944s. But overall, as I mentioned, these cars aren't that different, and I just thought I'd show you some of the differences between them. So if you're wondering weight-wise, what's the difference? Well, the early 944, according to the factory owner's manual, says that this car weighs 44 more pounds than the 924S. So anyway, guys, I hope that answered all your questions. So let's get out there and take these cars on test drive. So I'm out in the 924S now, and something to mention is that the 924S received the European gearbox, so it has a slightly shorter fifth gear than the US spec 944. So right now I'm in fifth gear going up this hill, and normally in the 944 I would still be in fourth, but the 924S pulls right up this hill no problem whatsoever. Something that I should also mention is that the 924S received the updated heated windshield sprayer nozzles, and it also received the late rain rails. Alright, I'm in the 944 now, and I'm going back up that hill that I mentioned earlier, and if I try and go to fifth gear, see the car does not like it. That's probably not only due to the taller fifth gear, but also because this car makes about 15 less horsepower than the 88 924S that I was just in. But that's not to say that this car still doesn't feel great, but there is a noticeable difference in power. So what I'll do next is a side-by-side of these cars on the highway driving 70, and you'll get a better idea of just how different the gearing is. As for driving, this car seems a little softer than the 924S, but it's a really great drive. But I definitely feel that the 924S is a bit more sporty, but it's still very comfortable though. All right, guys, that's just about going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you'd like to stay up to date with some of the projects we're working on around the shop, be sure to join us on Facebook. I'll leave a link in the description below. I also want to thank everyone who supports this channel on Patreon, since these videos would not be possible without you. But anyway, guys, that's going to do it. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.